Okay, we're going to talk about Tokyo Vampire Hotel now. This is a TV show that Sion Sono made for Amazon in like 2016. This was I think his first real TV show he did. So he went to do a vampire story. So he did this 9-part vampire story. It's split into 10 parts in Amazon thing because they split up one of the 2 hour long things into 2 half-hour sections. But it's a 7 or 8 hour extravaganza. It's not perfect, but it is very Sono and very enjoyable, and it is a twisted, weird look at vampire lore done by a master who is taking it serious but not taking it seriously at the same time. It's like he's seen so many vampire stories, from the traditional ones to like the anime versions of it. So there's influences of anime stuff, influences of like Hong Kong action movies and Mickey films, influences of traditional vampire stories, traditional other non-vampire stories and visuals into this weird mix of film, of almost a vampire soap opera and tragedy and comedy and crazy violence, and it's full of darkness but funny as hell. So it's just wonderful, weird mix. I mean, for a start, I highly recommend this. There is a dip in the middle of the show though. I mean, there is like an episode in the middle where it could have lost like 15 minutes and it would have been a lot better, because there's a subplot that goes on for a little bit that you don't really need for the story, and it just feels like it's adding time and it just takes a little bit away from the experience. But for most of the rest of it, it's really enjoyable, it's really well paced. Sono has his own sense of pace. He doesn't pace things the way other directors pace things, but it's his own internal thing, because everything's interrelated, everything can make sense when you see the full thing. It's just that when you see something like the bit I've just mentioned, where there's something that happens that you don't really need that much of, you get the idea straight away, and it just goes on for a bit, it's like you didn't need that. But usually Sono has his own sense of pace and he keeps it going pretty quick. Tokyo Vampire Hotel, the idea is that there was this girl born at a certain time in 1999, and on her 22nd birthday she will rise and become the saviour of the Dracula clan, who is a clan who's underground, been forced underground by the Corvin vampire clan, who are the people who rule the upper world. Now the Draculas found 3 babies born, 3 girls born at this particular time, this particular day. They've protected them, they've given them Dracula blood that will come into effect on their 22nd birthday, and hope they will turn the tide for them. Of course, it's much more complicated than that, and as the film starts, as the TV show starts, one of them is getting hunted down, and one of her protectors, Kay, arrives and protects her from all these people trying to kill her or kidnap her or do whatever they want to her. And she has to protect her. She is caught anyway, like this girl gets caught anyway, and you have to go into the Tokyo Vampire Hotel. And at this point you start doing flashbacks and you start to find out that the other 2 vampires saviours died. One by suicide, one by a body rejecting the blood. You also find out that their lives have been so protected that the real lives weren't real. And it's created this dislocation in their heads, so they know something's off, and they were dealing with all these people who were paid to be their parents even though they weren't their parents, and it created this thing of a new father, new mother, new father, new mother. So it created a dislocation for them that was a total disaster. But it's very Sono, and there's a whole episode in this and it's hilarious, it's really fun. At the same time, in the Vampire Hotel, a bunch of people have been brought in that same night, and the rumour is that the world's going to end that night. So the Vampire Hotel was locked down and the people are trapped in there to be food for the vampires to survive the apocalypse. And of course these people start to rebel, which leads to a lot of violence. That's the bit I was talking about where it's a problem, where the rebellion goes on a bit too long and the set up to it. Like you get a bit too much of it and you don't really need it, and it's ultimately not the point of the story. as the story keeps going, there is a rebellion. You find out more about the girl starts to mutate and become a uber vampire killer. You find out that the vampires use people as a blood source to build a hotel. It's weird, supernatural, very Suspiria like, Argento like feel to it, and the whole hotel feels very Argento with single colour palettes for different rooms. They change the costume whatever room they're in. The vampires, for some reason, they do vampires, which is wonderful. It's a very Argento three mothers type influence on the film. Of course, then at some point there's an hour-long battle between the vampires and the humans that puts every other vampire thing to shame for violence, because this is hour-long. It makes Dusk Till Dawn look sad in comparison, because this is excessive for an hour. There's parodies of Scarface, there's parodies of various other films. It's just wonderful. And eventually the film resolves itself when you find out that this was all a scam, and the world didn't end. It was just a scam, a psychological scam made by this sick guy in charge of the Corvin vampires, who felt his life was useless because he'd been manipulated by his father and the vampires, and he was just messing with them. And it was really funny because this whole thing, this whole like half of the film is about something that's just a big joke, and it's all about the actual after effects of all, as people try and survive the whole thing and try and get through to the other side to realise they can leave the hotel. And of course, as people who survived the vampire massacre and things, the humans and the vampires, they've all become so traumatised by the events that they don't want to leave the hotel, and they become almost like ghosts of the hotel. So there's tons of weird Sono things going through it. It all becomes a story about trauma and forced trauma by people who are already traumatised, and how that creates more trauma. Because I mean, ultimately, the Draculas who turned into total scumbags didn't have to do anything. All they do was let the Corvins destroy themselves, and they would have been fine. The Corvins were ready to destroy themselves. They hated each other. They were just self-destructive egomaniacs. So they could have just sit back and watch them destroy themselves. But you wouldn't have had all the bloodbaths then. You wouldn't have all these weird prophecies that turned out not to be prophecies, but just like psychological limitations placed on the characters, and damage done to the characters, and creations of problems for the characters. And there's this thing that the Dracula, people with Dracula blood can't stand sunlight and can't stand crosses, but the Corvin vampires are fine with sunlight and crosses. And it's because psychologically the psychology is turned into their bodies, and it becomes this thing that the vampires, Dracula vampires, believe they can do it, so they can't do it, and they've been forced underground by their own limitations. Meanwhile, the Corvin vampires haven't. But it's the two different psychologies. The one become egocentric and one become almost reclusive. And this whole idea of what the psychology does to these creatures, and how they manipulate their worlds, really. Like, the Corvins become super stylized and just basically superficial, and they have to be like brought down by blood and by trauma to actually feel again and actually find some sort of humanity. And by that, they're doing that by actually having a crazy leader who is just completely self-destructive, and he's really interesting. It's the same guy who plays the serial killer in Forest of Love, playing a completely different version of this thing. So it shows good range. And the whole film feels the whole TV show is this mix between emotional feeling and superficiality, the projections people place themselves. Like, the protector Kay goes through this whole film and she gets so much wrong. And normally in those films, these protector characters are so right most of the time. But this one, she's very wrong about certain things. She gets fooled repeatedly, and you find out she's not that old. She was turned into a vampire fairly recently, and she's been manipulated by the Draculas to make her And there was this other girl in love with her at the time who was taking up the Corvins, and this girl did everything for her, and she didn't realise till too late, because she was uncomfortable with it, that that was the person she should have been with, not these Draculas. And people get destroyed by the people who they go to for help because of their own weakness. And by their own weaknesses, like, there's so many people humans kill because they don't stand up to the vampire straight away. There's so many people make so many horrible mistakes. And one of the problems with the humans is you see they're selfish, you see they're weak, and that's part of the theme. But the leader is meant to be the inspiring one. He's an annoying git throughout the film. So you have no sympathy for him. But it's quite interesting, humans are as flawed as the vampires. And as you go further on, you see how traumatised they are and how difficult their lives are. And it is about humanity, using vampires as a metaphor for like power structures, really. It's about power structures and different sort of power structures and how you suck up to them and how you fight against them and where it leaves you, because it leads you to just detente usually and death. So it becomes this thing about power through vampires and taking the metaphor of power through the vampires and how it can actually twist you into all these areas that are not good for you. But you also have some amazing action scenes, and Sono really goes for it. And there's one episode about 2/3 of the way through it that is just wall-to-wall violence for an hour, and it's just beautiful, it's just wonderful. And then it goes into the story for the rest of it and actually gives you a satisfying resolution that's very haunting, because this film feels partly a vampire film, partly a ghost story. I mean, they've got all these like flesh rooms and things of people who are cutting themselves and whose blood is feeding the hotel and things like that. It's all about weird perversions of humanity and how dark we can be and how that's exploited by the ruling classes. I mean, it is really dark, but it has a sweetness to it at the same time. So it's a great Sono film. It's a typical Sono film. It's not his best one, but it's really good. It's really enjoyable, so I'd highly recommend it. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope it inspires you to go and see Tokyo Vampire Hotel. Despite its title, it is a lot more sophisticated than you'd initially expect. Right, I'll see you later. Bye for now.